It happened. They're leaving. According to our intelligence, Russian security forces and military personnel who flooded into occupied Sevastopol after 2014 are packing their bags in a panic. Following massive raids by kind drones and heated Ukrainian announcements, Putin's servicemen are evacuating their families to relatives in Russia en masse.
Next, the borscht recipe from the freedom-loving Ukrainian bird is at work. A total air defense collapse, the puncturing of the fleet's remains, the halting of the shadow fleet, total resource and logistical exhaustion, a tourism default, an energy desert, a transport lockdown, and so on.
They're even whispering to their close friends and relatives in secret, "Run now! Soon the exit from Crimea will be closed and special passes will be required for everyone." The occupiers thought they were coming for a hot summer season by the sea, but they had no idea that a completely different kind of heat was coming to Crimea, a Ukrainian one. What was I saying? We started with Crimea, and we'll end with Crimea. The peninsula is one step away from liberation. Things are really starting to heat up now. Military and civilians are leaving in droves. Putin's security forces are evacuating entire families. Giant traffic jams on the Kerch Bridge. Logistics have been destroyed. There's no gas, no water, and no food. The Ukrainian SBS announced an energy desert. This is how the peninsula is greeting the Ukrainian heat. But this is only the beginning. It's going to get worse and tougher. Meanwhile, 3 ferries have gone to the bottom. Trains are being cancelled and a curfew is being imposed throughout Crimea. Total chaos. How the AFU is preparing the final blow for the complete isolation of Crimea, we'll tell you right now. Greetings. This is the Ukraine Today channel. I'm Andrei Silikov with hot news from Crimea. A real apocalypse has begun in occupied Crimea, and these aren't just words, but a harsh reality for Russians. After massive raids by hundreds of Ukrainian drones, the peninsula's logistics and infrastructure collapsed like a house of cards. FSB bases in Armyansk, fuel tanks in Feodosia, and infrastructure in occupied Kerch are burning brightly. The occupiers and Russians have finally smelled trouble and have begun leaving the peninsula in droves. Absolute chaos reigns at the exit from Crimea. Train services are being cancelled, crying Muscovite women report.
It's just trash. God, why am I here? I want to go back to Moscow. What are these ruins?
The Crimean bridge is constantly closed, and giant traffic jams of 700 cars are piling up at its approaches, filled with Russians crazed with fear who suddenly want to go back to Moscow.
Oh my God, seriously. There is a massive traffic jam there again.
The most painful blow was dealt to the transport arteries that supplied Putin's army. Ukrainian Defense Forces brilliantly neutralized 3 ferries at once. Among them is the vital car and passenger ferry Lavrenti, which operated on the strategic Crimea-Caucasus line. Now the occupiers' supply line is cut, and all freight traffic is forced onto a dangerous land corridor, where our military is already waiting for it.
The vessel provided transportation for freight vehicles and passengers between the ports of the Krasnodar region and Crimea. Thus, as a result of successive strikes, key elements of the ferry service across the Kerch Strait, which played an important role in the transport support of the Crimea-Caucasus route, were hit.
Following the transport collapse, a full-scale humanitarian catastrophe has hit the peninsula. Local puppet leaders Aksionov and Razvozhayev have panicked and declared a de facto state of emergency. The sale of any fuel to the civilian population has been officially halted. Gasoline is being saved only for the military and special services. Due to damaged Crimean networks, strict blackout schedules have been introduced across the peninsula.
I'm walking in Crimea because there's no gasoline. Heading to the city center because there's no power at home to charge my gadgets. And you know what's worrying? I froze strawberries for the winter. Maybe I shouldn't have done that at all.
Street lighting has been completely cut off. Supermarkets are closing at 2000 hours.
We've vacationed in Crimea for 3 years in a row. We've never encountered a situation like this.
And because of the de-energized pumping stations, Crimea is also completely without fresh water.
My children saw it all with their own eyes, heard it. I used to underestimate the whole situation. I wish everyone a peaceful sky overhead. Now my opinion has changed tremendously.
Restrictions have even been placed on food. Locals are reporting new limits on the purchase of basic goods such as flour, pasta, and so on.
Look, here is just one single bag of flour. Great. You can only take one bag of flour. Well, at least you can take 3 packs of pasta. And 3 cans of stewed meat are allowed. Okay, rice, buckwheat, 3 of each. Well, you can have 3 of everything except flour. We ended up, filling a whole cart. Holy crap.
As they used to say, stability is what we should value. Well, now the peninsula has a new kind of stability.
Stability is extremely important. Look, there's tension and turbulence in the world. Explosions, but we have stability. Crimean residents have been urged to turn off air conditioners and unnecessary electrical appliances. Oleg Khrushchev, advisor to the Crimean Gauleiter, asked residents of the peninsula to limit electricity consumption while the power system accident is being fixed. Earlier, part of Crimea was left without power. In Sevastopol, a schedule of temporary power outages has already been introduced. Due to the accident, most pumping stations are also de-energized and water supply has been cut off in some settlements.
The much-touted holiday season has turned into a catastrophic failure. Hotels stand empty, beaches look like post-apocalyptic movie sets, and traitorous businessmen who took out loans for renovations are going under. And those aren't even my words. Everything is being recorded by local vacationers. See for yourselves.
So it's practically lunchtime already and the beach is empty. Usually it's absolutely packed here. Only a few people showed up by lunch, and this morning, well, we were almost alone. It's just all empty. Why is this happening? There's tons of space in the parking lot. We just pull up and park, no one's around. Nothing like this has ever happened here before.
It's come to the point where even the Artek children's camp is cancelling sessions, and buses with kids are just being turned back on the highway.
Just half an hour ago, we got a call from the Crimean Ministry of Education saying that absolutely all sessions in children's camps are cancelled this year. There are gas problems. It's hit or miss. Today, I don't know, there was a strike on some energy infrastructure and power outages started. It's not a very pleasant situation, of course, and I don't know what to do about it yet.
I'll tell you what to do. Unpack your bags and forget about Crimea. Because starting this summer, only our drones will be vacationing on the peninsula. This was already announced by the commander of the AFU Unmanned Systems Forces, Robert Brovdi, known as Magyar, who also apologized to pro-Ukrainian residents of Crimea for the temporary inconvenience and passed a final sentence on the occupiers.
Ukrainians in the occupied territory, please forgive us in advance for the constant alarms, closed bridges and roads, darkness, lack of silence and stress. Stay away from military facilities and anything flammable. Share memes and just take care of yourselves. The bird works with precision. However, chips will inevitably fly when the forest is being chopped. There's no other visible way to demilitarize the worm and smoke out 1 million occupiers from the peninsula. The work will be hard, but we know it. Crimea will destroy Moscow. This is the psychological breaking point.
And while strange earthquakes that make houses shake are being recorded on the coast, the Ukrainian Air Force intriguingly states, "We were watching the Crimean bridge last night. The ring around the occupiers is tightening with incredible speed. The peninsula is rapidly turning into an island cut off from the world, without power, without water, without gasoline, and without any escape routes. The total roasting of Putin's army is only just beginning. And the final blow that will isolate Crimea from Russia forever is just around the corner." A total blackout, dry taps, and empty fuel tanks. Due to precise Ukrainian strikes, the peninsula was plunged into darkness, and after the power went out, the water disappeared too. As the commander of the Unmanned Systems Forces, Magyar, aptly noted, Crimea has finally turned from a military bridgehead into a giant problem for Russia. See all the details of the infrastructural hell for the occupiers in our report.
The Ukrainian military successfully hit targets on both sides of the Crimean bridge. This was stated by President Volodymyr Zelensky. They attacked in particular maritime logistics for oil transport in the Krasnodar region, an oil depot in temporarily occupied Kerch, and the Russian army's air defense. According to Zelensky, units of the Security Service of Ukraine, the Unmanned Systems Forces, the main intelligence directorate, and the Special Operations Forces were involved in the operation.
We have long proposed the concept of turning Crimea into, well, a trap, not into a fortress, as they said, claiming there would be a logistics route, a supply line through the Kerch Strait. through Crimea to the south of our, so to speak, mainland, as they described it, but to close it off completely, both from the mainland side, Mariupol, Zaporizhia, Kherson, and accordingly all bridges and ferry crossings, and from Kerch. These strikes effectively create conditions for the isolation of Crimea, and then we can strike across all territories.
The commander of the Unmanned Systems Forces, Robert Brovdi, specified that among the targets hit were an oil depot at an oil terminal near Kerch, Kasta 2E, 2 radar stations near Kurortene and Nebo U in Kerch. Several gas compressor stations in the settlements of Aromatne, Zhuravlivka, and Kliuchi were also hit. All facilities are located in temporarily occupied Crimea and, according to the USF, were used in the supply system for Russian troops. Analysts emphasize that the armed forces of Ukraine aim to clear the peninsula of the Russian military component.
They are already preparing to flee there. I'll say it straight. There have been such trends repeatedly. They would appear, then the Crimeans, and especially the military, that is, representatives of the occupation forces, would seem to calm down. But now the mood is to run. Many are already working out routes to return to Russia, those who came there with the occupation, especially civilians. Right now, the mood is one that leads to panic. Moreover, it's fueled by our strikes and shortages, for example, in energy. There's no gasoline, no oil, nothing, in all directions from Kerch to Sevastopol. This is all of Crimea.
In temporarily occupied Crimea, fuel sales at gas stations have completely ceased in every form. Occupation authorities announced that fuel will only be released to state services that maintain the peninsula's vital functions. Such a sharp fuel shortage for Russian logistics could hit the aggressor country's economy hard, experts note.
Russia depends on the railroads, meaning there is a certain amount of traffic there, but it depends even more on the motorways. And if road logistics are halted or significantly reduced, then a real collapse begins in Russia. Therefore, we must keep up the pressure. We've already achieved a significant reduction in Russia's oil and gas export revenues very substantially, by more than 50% overall. And Russia now spends 3 times more on the war than it receives in budget revenues from the oil and gas sector.
Besides the fuel shortage in Russian-occupied Crimea, damage to the electrical grids has caused partial power outages for consumers in several districts. As a result, the water supply has also been partially cut off. Occupation authorities reported that to eliminate grid overload outside Sevastopol, a temporary power outage schedule has been introduced in the city.
Due to damage in the electrical grids, there has been a partial disconnection of consumers in the northwestern, central, and south coast energy districts. Emergency restoration work is currently underway. Krim Reali on Telegram quotes Crimenergo.
Analysts from the American Institute for the Study of War note that Ukrainian strikes on Russian transport and rail infrastructure are already disrupting supply lines for occupation forces and complicating Russian logistics in the left bank Kherson region and Crimea. According to experts, further fire impact on key supply routes could have a ripple effect on the battlefield and significantly reduce Russia's ability to provide its troops with critical resources. Nikita Skoblikov for Freedom TV channel.
Moreover, swarms of our long-range drones have driven the occupiers into a phase of total paranoia, with feverish digging up of the beaches. After the official announcement of a total lockdown on the peninsula's logistics, nerves frayed at the very top. Sergei Lavrov himself had to make hysterical excuses in front of the cameras. How exactly is Crimea being turned into an isolated island without a single chance for ammunition supplies? And why has the Kremlin's imperial myth finally collapsed? You will find out right now. The Kremlin has begun cautiously preparing Russians for the failure of the special military operation. What was considered treason and capitulation just yesterday has suddenly begun to sound on Russian propagandists' broadcast as a quite realistic future scenario. And this is a very alarming signal for Moscow. For years, Russians were told a fairy tale about inevitable victory, the seizure of new territories, and the fulfillment of all set goals. But now, even the most loyal voices of Kremlin propaganda are starting to admit the obvious. Without new waves of mobilization and colossal sacrifices, Russia might simply fail to reach even those goals it once triumphantly claimed as achievements. It turns out to be a rather awkward situation. They've already declared the territories their own, yet they still haven't been able to reach them. The funniest part is that the very same propagandists who, until recently, demanded fighting to the bitter end, are now cautiously testing the waters for a completely different story. In the Russian media space, talk of freezing the war and halting hostilities along the front line is appearing more and more often, something that Moscow previously called an absolutely unacceptable option. It seems as though the Kremlin's television channels have received a new set of instructions. While citizens were previously being prepared for a great victory, they are now being gradually accustomed to the idea that unfulfilled goals are also a victory. As if everything went according to plan, it's just that the plan itself suddenly changed quite drastically. And if this trend is indeed gaining momentum, it could be a dangerous signal for the Kremlin, because when propaganda starts explaining why defeat is actually a success, it means that behind the scenes they already perfectly understand reality has turned out to be much harsher than the fairy tales on television. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian military is already nipping at the occupiers' heels. Real paranoia is beginning in Crimea. The Russians take the threat of a Ukrainian return to the peninsula so seriously that they are increasingly digging in, building fortifications, and preparing for scenarios they tried not to even mention until recently.
The enemy views this as a real threat. The Russians are fortifying areas in Crimea that are vulnerable to amphibious landings, as they consider this to be quite likely.
For the Kremlin, the situation looks rather awkward. For years, Russian propaganda has been convincing the population that Crimea is supposedly under Moscow's full control forever. But if everything is so calm, then why mine the coast, build new defensive lines, and feverishly prepare for possible surprises from the sea? It seems that even the occupiers themselves don't really believe their own television tall tales. However, the Navy emphasizes that such operations are among the most difficult in warfare, and can only be carried out as part of a major offensive campaign.
If necessary, we will of course carry out any operation needed to liberate Ukrainian Crimea.
Especially telling was his comparison of future challenges to the legendary landing on Omaha Beach during the Second World War. After all, the occupiers are already turning the Crimean coast into a continuous obstacle course. And the more effort they put into these fortifications, the louder the main question becomes. If Crimea is truly Russian forever, then why is it being defended as if they are most afraid of losing it? Ukraine is tightening the logistical noose around occupied Crimea ever more, and the Russian command risks facing a problem that cannot be solved by loud statements or more propaganda stories. Mikhailo Fedorov has made a bold statement. Crimea is being isolated by drones, and very soon Crimea will turn into an island, which could lead to very unexpected consequences for the Russians. This is no longer about individual strikes, but a systematic campaign that is gradually destroying the occupiers' military logistics. The most painful thing for Moscow is that drones are hitting not just specific targets, but the army's entire supply system. After all, any troop grouping can only fight as long as it receives fuel, ammunition, equipment, and reinforcements. And when these routes start falling out of the game one by one, problems very quickly reach even the front lines. The scale is particularly telling. According to the minister, in the first months of this year alone, several times more such drones were contracted than in the entire previous year. And this is only the beginning.
We have announced a logistical lockdown. For the Russians, a hell is beginning that is very difficult to deal with. And we have this window of opportunity. Logistics are being cut, Crimea is being isolated, and this is reflected in the east. There is a direct correlation between how much we hit logistics and how many assault actions occur on the front line.
In the Kremlin, this seems to have seriously affected everyone. After the loud statements about the isolation of Crimea, the Russian leadership suddenly decided to publicly make excuses. Interestingly, Sergei Lavrov had to respond personally. It seems the topic turned out to be much more painful than Moscow would have liked. Commenting on Mikhailo Fedorov's words that Crimea could effectively turn into an island due to strikes on logistics, the head of the Russian Foreign Ministry stated that he didn't quite understand exactly how they intend to do this. However, the very fact that such a reaction appeared already looks quite telling, as the Kremlin usually doesn't rush to comment on what they don't consider a serious threat. Lavrov's next statement sounded even more interesting. He assured that a solution is supposedly already being sought for Ukrainian drones, saying that there is an antidote for any drone. Here, a perfectly logical question arises. If the antidote is almost ready, then why do Russian warehouses, bases, airfields, and logistical routes continue to regularly make the news? It wouldn't be complete without the traditional Kremlin arrogance. In the end, Lavrov decided to get personal and stated that Fedorov is new to the position, so he still needs to settle in. However, this looks quite amusing because while Moscow advises the Ukrainian minister to settle in, it is Russian officials who are increasingly forced to explain to their own citizens why explosions, fires, and logistical problems occur in places that just yesterday were considered absolutely safe. The more actively the Kremlin tries to mock the threat, the stronger the impression that it actually worries them seriously. They are understanding the unpleasant reality better and better. The war, which was planned to end in a matter of days, is gradually turning into a struggle for their own logistics, their own rear, and even for a sense of security in territories that just yesterday were called forever Russian. If this trend continues, Moscow's main problem will no longer be how to win, but how to explain to Russians why the promised great victory looks more like an attempt to save what's left with each passing month. But it's not just about Crimea. A massive blow to the Kremlin's gas stations. Ukraine's latest long-range attacks have knocked out over 20% of all Russian oil refining capacity. Analysts have already recognized this fuel crisis as the largest since the start of the full-scale invasion. At Russian gas stations, there's either no gas at all, or it's being rationed with a strict limit of up to 20 liters per person. All the details of the massive oil collapse in Russia coming up next.
Russians are losing their cool. Gasoline has become a luxury in the gas station country. An acute fuel shortage is being reported in several regions of Russia. There are miles-long lines at gas stations. For example, in the Lipetsk region, they report a total lack of gasoline at some stations. A similar situation is seen in the Yaroslavl region, Stavropol Krai, Tyumen, and Cheboksary, where drivers complain about the lack of A92, A95, and diesel fuel.
What exactly is going on? Are we living in some kind of stone age? We're living in the age of dinosaurs. Why is there no gas in Chuvashia? And even if there is some, 92 costs 89 rubles per liter.
Analysts suggest that the latest wave of strikes could have knocked out more than 20% of Russia's oil refining capacity. The International Energy Agency called this disruption unprecedented in the entire time of Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine. In particular, fuel problems hit hardest in the regions located near the front line.
The Federal Anti-Monopoly Service has already started opening cases with the prosecutor's office against, various gas stations. Like they went to Neftomagistral and other, independent stations that don't have their own systems there for oil production or refining and buy fuel on the exchange from producers. Consequently, they just raised prices above 100, 110, 115 rubles per liter. And now, accordingly, the anti-monopoly officials have demanded they lower prices even though there's no fuel.
Problems have started even where they didn't exist before. For example, in St. Petersburg, Moscow, Voronezh, and Tula. Russian officials, meanwhile, are trying to pretend that everything is fine. The current fuel crisis in Russia could become the most serious since the start of Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine. Problems have already affected 53 regions of the aggressor country. At many gas stations, you can buy no more than 20 liters of gasoline and 40 liters of diesel per tank. According to Reuters, due to the growing shortage, Moscow is considering the possibility of purchasing fuel abroad. According to the agency, supplies could be organized from one of the Asian countries. Earlier, Russia had already considered the option of importing by sea. Russia also purchased fuel from Belarus and Kazakhstan. However, as Reuters sources note, these countries will not be able to help significantly if the situation worsens further.
Oil production in Russia has been declining for the sixth month in a row, fueled by increasingly frequent Ukrainian drone strikes on the country's energy infrastructure, which disrupt the operation of storage and transport facilities needed to maintain production. According to Bloomberg calculations based on OPEC data, as a result of this reduction, oil production in Russia was approximately 690,000 barrels per day below the OPEC plus quota. From an article in the Moscow Times.
Russia will receive less revenue from its oil, but that's not even the worst thing for them. If we talk not about the short term, but about the medium term perspective for the Kremlin, a more frightening thing is what to do with the wells. Oil wells operate in such a way that either they operate at almost full capacity or they are closed. But if you can't export the oil, if you can't refine it inside the country, it turns out, where do you put the oil? There is virtually no other choice but to just go and turn off the tap on that well.
Long-range sanctions are hitting Russia's pocketbook, depriving the Kremlin of funding for its war machine. The day before, the Ukrainian Defense Forces hit the Tyumen oil refinery. This was confirmed by the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. The Tyumen refinery processes 9 million tons of oil per year. The plant produces gasoline, diesel fuel, fuel oil, and aviation fuel. It plays an important role in providing the regions of Western Siberia with fuel. In May, oil production in Russia fell to a yearly low amid intensifying Ukrainian drone attacks on oil refineries. According to Reuters, at the end of May, almost all major oil industry facilities in central Russia were forced to reduce or completely stop operations. Victoria Chistukina for Freedom TV channel.
And what do you think about these events? Write to me in the comments, give a like, and stay informed about the main things. More to come.